The briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command was built to intimidate, concrete walls thick enough to swallow echoes, screens mounted like watchful eyes, flags, American, Navy, and Command standing rigid in their places as if they, too, understood the weight of what happened inside these walls. Every chair at the long steel table was occupied, captains, commanders, senior chiefs, and at the head of the table, relaxed in a way only power allowed, sat the admiral, a man whose reputation alone could silence a room faster than any order. At the far end, slightly apart from the others, stood her, Lieutenant Commander Ava Hale. She stood at attention, hands clasped behind her back, spine straight, eyes forward. No unnecessary movement. No tension visible. Her digital camouflage was immaculate, boots polished to regulation sheen. The only thing that set her apart was that she wasn't seated, and that she didn't seem impressed. The Admiral tapped a finger on the table as the last slide of the mission briefing faded from the screen. "So," he said casually, scanning the room, "this operation needs a liaison from DevGru." A murmur moved through the officers. Names were expected, resumes, maybe arguments. The Admiral's eyes finally settled on Ava. "You?" Every head turned. "Yes, sir," she replied, voice level, neither eager nor defensive. The Admiral leaned back in his chair, studying her like a chess piece he hadn't decided how to use. He had read the file. Of course he had. But files didn't always tell the whole story, especially when they were quiet, too quiet. He smirked slightly. "Lieutenant Commander Hale, right. Yes, sir, your record's impressive," he said. "Decorations, deployments, cross-attachments." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "But it's missing something." A few officers exchanged glances. The Admiral tilted his head. "What's your call sign?" There it was, a harmless question on the surface, a joke beneath it. Someone at the table chuckled. Another smiled. Call signs were earned in stories, often embarrassing ones, names given by teammates after mistakes, mishaps, or moments of irony. Asking for one in a room like this was a subtle way of reminding someone where they stood. Ava didn't react. She didn't blink, didn't shift her weight, didn't tighten her jaw. She had heard worse in worse places. "Sir," she said calmly, "my call sign is operationally restricted." That drew a few raised eyebrows. The Admiral laughed softly. "Restricted?" He glanced around the table. "This isn't a classified bar fight, Lieutenant Commander. We're among professionals." A senior chief leaned back, arms crossed, watching her carefully. He'd seen that look before, the stillness, the kind that came from people who had learned, long ago, that reactions cost lives. The Admiral waved a hand. "Come on, humor us. We could use a little entertainment before lunch." The word hung in the air. Entertainment. Ava inhaled slowly, then exhaled, not out of nerves, but out of courtesy. "Yes, sir," she said. She took one step forward. The room seemed to lean in without realizing it. "My call sign," she continued, "is Night Fox." The words were simple. They landed like a weight. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the smiles faded. The Admiral's expression changed. Not dramatically, not visibly enough for anyone to call it shock. But his eyes sharpened. His posture straightened. The room, once loose and conversational, pulled itself tight. One officer frowned, searching his memory. Another went still. A senior chief's jaw clenched. The Admiral didn't laugh this time. "A Night Fox?" he repeated, slower now. "Yes, sir." The silence grew heavy, thick with recognition that hadn't fully formed yet but was already uncomfortable. The Admiral glanced toward the intelligence officer seated near the screens. "That name ring a bell to you?" The officer hesitated. "Sir, possibly." Ava remained motionless. She didn't explain, didn't clarify, didn't volunteer anything that wasn't asked, because she knew something they didn't. If they knew the name, the joke would be over. If they didn't, it would be soon. The Admiral studied her again, really studied her this time, not the uniform, not the rank, but the stillness, the discipline. The kind of composure that wasn't taught in classrooms or earned on parade grounds. "Lieutenant Commander," he said quietly, "you'll remain after the briefing." "Yes, sir." As the meeting adjourned, chairs scraped and conversations resumed in low tones. Officers stood, some glancing at her with curiosity now instead of amusement, one or two with something closer to unease. Ava didn't move until the room was nearly empty. She had stood in worse rooms than this. And she knew, without doubt, that by the end of the day, no one would ever ask her call sign as a joke again. The briefing room never truly emptied. Even after the chairs were pushed back and the senior officers filed out in clusters, their voices low and speculative, something lingered in the air. A tension that hadn't been there before, like the moment after a distant explosion when your ears are ringing and your body hasn't decided whether to move yet. Lieutenant Commander Ava Hale remained exactly where she was. At attention, silent, unbothered. The Admiral hadn't moved either. He stood near the head of the table now, hands resting on the back of his chair, watching the door close behind the last departing officer. When the latch clicked, the room felt suddenly smaller. "Intelligence," he said without turning around. The intelligence officer, Commander Lewis, straightened. "Yes, sir." "Pull the name." Lewis hesitated. "Sir, there are multiple restricted profiles that don't surface on standard queries." The Admiral finally turned. "Then don't use a standard query." Lewis swallowed and nodded, fingers already moving across the secure terminal. The main screen flickered to life, lines of encrypted access protocols scrolling faster than most eyes could follow. Ava stood still. She didn't look at the screen, didn't look at the Admiral. Her gaze remained fixed on a point just above the far wall, neutral, disciplined, detached. The Admiral watched her out of the corner of his eye. He'd asked the question as a joke. He knew that now. He'd seen plenty of officers freeze, stammer, or laugh awkwardly when put on the spot like that. He'd expected deflection, maybe attitude. He hadn't expected composure. "Sir," Lewis said quietly. The Admiral's attention snapped to the screen. "What am I looking at?" Lewis cleared his throat. A compartmentalized operational identity. The call sign Night Fox is tied to multiple joint action taskings across maritime, desert, and urban environments. Black level classification. One of the senior chiefs, who had lingered near the wall, muttered, "That's not a nickname, no." Lewis agreed. "It's a designation." The Admiral folded his arms. "Explain." Lewis hesitated again, then chose his words carefully. Night Fox appears in after-action reports where outcomes exceeded mission parameters, hostage recoveries with 0 friendly casualties, direct action raids where targets vanished before resistance even formed. There are references to leadership roles without command attribution, in English. The Admiral said. Lewis met his eyes. "Sir, Night Fox is the person they sent in when failure wasn't an option, and acknowledgement wasn't allowed." The room went quiet again. The Admiral looked back at Ava. "Lieutenant Commander Hale," he said slowly, "why wasn't this in your file?" "Because, sir," she replied evenly, "it was never meant to be." A beat. The Admiral exhaled through his nose, not anger, not disbelief. "Something closer to recalibration, so the laughter," he said, glancing briefly toward the door the others had exited through, "that didn't bother you?" "No, sir." "Why not?" Ava paused, not because she was unsure, but because the answer deserved precision. "Because, sir," she said, "people laugh when they feel safe, they stop when they understand." The senior chief let out a low breath. "Damn." The Admiral studied her in silence, not just her face, but the way she held herself. The absence of defensiveness, the lack of pride, this wasn't someone waiting to be recognized. This was someone who had already done the work. "Why are you here?" he asked finally, in this room, on this mission. Ava met his eyes for the first time. "Because someone thought the enemy would underestimate a liaison," she said, "and because they were right." The Admiral's mouth twitched, not into a smile, but into something close to respect. "You realize," he said, "half the officers who laughed out there would follow you into hell if they knew what this name meant?" "Yes, sir." "And the other half? They'd hesitate?" Alva said calmly. "Once." The Admiral turned back to the screen, scrolling through the redacted reports, the ghosted images, the mission timestamps that stopped abruptly where details should have been. "Night Fox," he said again, this time without humor. The name no longer sounded like a call sign. It sounded like a warning. He straightened, shoulders squaring, command presence settling back into place. But altered now, adjusted. "Lieutenant Commander Hale," he said, "this operation just changed." "Yes, sir." The Admiral looked at her one last time, and for the first time since the meeting began, the silence in the room wasn't awkward. It was respectful, and somewhere outside that thick concrete room, the officers who had laughed were beginning to realize that the joke hadn't been on her at all. The Admiral didn't sit back down. He remained standing at the head of the table, one hand resting on the cold steel surface, the other loosely clenched behind him. The screen behind him still glowed with redacted lines and mission timestamps, but no one was looking at it anymore. Every eye was on Ava Hale. "Night Fox," the Admiral said again, quieter this time, not as a question, as a confirmation. "Yes, sir." There was a subtle shift in the room, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to those who had spent years in command. It was the soundless moment when authority recalibrated itself, when assumptions fell away. The Admiral gestured toward the chair nearest him. "At ease, sit." Ava complied smoothly, without urgency. She sat straight, backed, hands resting lightly on her thighs, eyes forward, still no trace of ego, still no explanation offered. "You understand," the Admiral said, "that names like that don't surface unless someone digs." "Yes, sir, and someone always digs," he replied. He nodded to the intelligence officer. "Continue." Commander Lewis scrolled again. "Sir, the designation Night Fox appears across multiple task forces, JSOC, Allied Special Operations, Maritime Interdictions. In every instance, attribution is deliberately obscured, commanding officers change, locations change, outcomes don't." "What outcomes?" the Admiral asked. Lewis hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Targets captured without firefights. Hi, Val, you individuals extracted from hostile territory without alarms triggered. Teams reporting that resistance wasn't there when it should have been." A senior commander frowned. "That's not luck." "No, sir," Lewis said, "that's preparation and anticipation." The Admiral looked at Ava again. "You were running those missions." "I was part of them," she answered, "often in a leadership role. Often," he pressed. "When command needed deniability," Ava said, "and results." Silence followed. One of the officers who had laughed earlier shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He hadn't meant anything by it. That was the worst part. He'd seen a junior-looking officer, a calm face, a quiet presence, and assumed the rest. The Admiral noticed. "Lieutenant Commander," he said, "why didn't you correct me earlier?" Ava turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze again. "Sir, correcting you wouldn't have changed the room. Letting the room correct itself would." The Admiral held her eyes for a long second, then he gave a single nod. "Fair." He paced slowly now, hands behind his back. "You know how many people in this building would give anything to have a reputation like that?" "Yes, sir, and you carry it like it weighs nothing." Ava's jaw tightened, just a fraction. "It weighs what it needs to." The intelligence officer cleared his throat. Sir, there's more. Go on. There are references to a back tattoo, Lewis said cautiously, mentioned in two Allied reports, a fox insignia, black ink minimalist, used as a visual confirmation during joint operations. The Admiral stopped pacing. He turned slowly toward Ava. You want to explain that? Ava nodded once. Standard identification during zero, light insertions when name, rank, and radio silence were all liabilities. One of the chiefs let out a low whistle before he could stop himself. The Admiral didn't react to the sound. His expression had hardened, not in anger, but in gravity. You were operating outside the normal chain. He said, Yes, sir. Why? Because the enemy studied chains, Ava replied. I studied people. The Admiral exhaled slowly. This briefing, he said, gesturing to the room, was supposed to be routine. Assign a liaison, move on. He looked at her again. Instead, I made a joke. Ava didn't respond. I won't apologize, he continued, not because I'm not wrong, but because you didn't need it. That earned the smallest shift in her expression, not a smile, something closer to acknowledgement. The Admiral straightened fully now, command voice returning, but different than before. Lieutenant Commander Ava Hale, he said, effective immediately, you will not serve as liaison. A few heads snapped up. You will serve as operational authority. The room stilled. You will have direct access to me. The Admiral continued. You will shape this mission, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with my rank. Ava stood. Yes, sir. The Admiral looked around the room. Any objections? No one spoke, not because they were afraid, because they understood. As Ava returned to attention, the name Night Fox no longer hung in the air like a mystery. It settled instead, heavy, earned, and undeniable, and everyone in that room knew one thing with absolute certainty. The silence had not been accidental. She had commanded it.